One drone, 10 floors up. An apartment building in Galati, Romania. 1:54 in the morning. 2 people injured. A fire on the roof. And something else. Something that changes the math on this war in ways that most coverage hasn't caught up with yet. That drone was the 28th Russian incursion into Romanian airspace since the invasion of Ukraine began. 28th. Let that number sit for a moment. Because the story here is not about one drone hitting one building. The story is about what happens when a NATO country decides that the 28th time is the last time it answers with only a diplomatic note. Romania's response was not proportionate in the traditional sense. It was calibrated, deliberate, and architecturally significant. And to understand why, you need to understand what Romania actually is right now. Not what it was in 2022 when this war started, but what it has become, quietly, systematically, over the 4 years since. Let me walk through what actually happened that night, because the operational detail matters. On May 29th, Russia launched a 43-drone attack wave against southern Ukraine, targeting the port of Ismail on the Danube River, directly across from the Romanian border. Most were intercepted by Ukrainian air defenses, but one Giran-2, Russia's copy of the Iranian Shahed drone, deviated from its course and crossed into Romanian airspace. Romanian radar tracked it immediately. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons were scrambled. An IAR-330 SOCAT military helicopter was deployed. Authorization to engage and shoot down the target was granted, and the pilots still couldn't stop it. Not because they lacked the capability, because the geometry made safe engagement impossible. The drone was flying at low altitude, a few hundred meters above ground. It remained in Romanian airspace for 4 minutes, covering approximately 10 kilometers. By the time the F-16s reached engagement range, the drone had already struck. Romania's defense ministry confirmed it plainly. Time was extremely limited, and firing on the drone over a populated area would have created civilian risk. That sentence is important, because it tells you something about the nature of the problem Romania is now trying to solve, and the specific architecture it is building to solve it. A second drone was found the same night, hundreds of kilometers away in Romania's northwest, in the Maramureș region. No explosive payload, but Russian-made. The Defense Ministry confirmed the origin of both. One explosive drone striking a residential building. One surveillance drone found in the country's northwest, in the same night, from the same 43 drone wave. Romania put the evidence on the table and gave the Kremlin no room to maneuver. Vladimir Putin, standing in front of reporters in Astana, Kazakhstan, said he had only just heard about the incident. He questioned whether the drone was even Russian. No one can say what the origin of this or that drone is until an examination has been carried out, he said. Kremlin spokesman Peskov declined to confirm ownership. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova threatened a swift response to what came next. What came next was Romania's answer, and Romania's answer was not a strongly worded statement. President Nicolae Dan convened an emergency session of Romania's Supreme Council of National Defense, the CSAT, that same morning. Then he stepped before the press and announced a series of decisions that together amount to the most aggressive diplomatic response Romania has delivered since the war began. The Russian consul general in Constanta, Andrei Kosalin, was declared persona non grata. The Constanta consulate was ordered closed. That decision requires explanation because Constanta is not just Romania's largest port city. It hosts the largest NATO naval base on the Black Sea. It sits 1 hour from Mihail Kogalniceanu, which is currently being expanded into NATO's largest military base in all of Europe. It sits within range of Deveselu, where NATO's Aegis Ashore ballistic missile defense shield uses SM-3 interceptors to protect European airspace from ballistic missile threats. And Constanta's port has been the transit corridor through which over 193 million tons of goods have moved under EU solidarity lanes, sustaining both Ukrainian exports and the NATO supply chain. Romanian intelligence had already flagged the Constanta consulate as an active monitoring operation, tracking NATO naval movements, port traffic, and military shipments to Ukraine. When Romania closed that consulate, it didn't just expel a diplomat. It blinded Russia's most operationally valuable intelligence position on NATO's Black Sea flank. Zakharova called it a hostile act requiring a swift response. The country that dropped an explosive drone on a NATO apartment building was issuing retaliation threats. That tells you something about the Kremlin's read of the situation, and it tells you something about how much the Constanta consulate was actually worth to Moscow. The Russian ambassador in Bucharest was simultaneously summoned to the foreign ministry to receive a formal protest. Additional sanctions on Russian diplomatic personnel in Bucharest were proposed by CSAT. In a single night, Russia lost its consul general, its largest intelligence platform on the Black Sea, and a substantial portion of its diplomatic credibility, with every NATO government watching how Romania responded. The alliance responded immediately. NATO Secretary General Rutte expressed absolute solidarity and reiterated that the alliance would defend every square centimeter of Allied territory. U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker called the incident a reckless incursion. NATO spokesperson Alison Hart went beyond condemnation, signaling that potential additional defensive measures are being considered. That last phrase matters. Not rhetoric, operational steps. European Commission President von der Leyen said Russia's war of aggression had crossed yet another line and announced preparation of a 21st sanctions package, a package that had not been on the agenda before that morning. France summoned the Russian ambassador to the Quai d'Orsay and condemned the incident as an extremely irresponsible act. France has troops stationed in Romania. That drone flew over French personnel, Paris noticed. Ukrainian President Zelensky offered to support Romania in whatever way is necessary. Romania's foreign minister put the diplomatic instrument on the table directly. Article 4. NATO's collective consultation mechanism. When any member state believes its territorial integrity or security is under threat, it can bring the entire alliance to the table for formal consultations. It doesn't require military force, but it changes the political calculus significantly, because it makes any subsequent incident a matter of collective alliance response, not bilateral diplomacy. This card has been played before, with concrete results. In September 2025, Poland activated Article 4 after 19 Russian drones entered its airspace in a single night. That activation was a first in NATO history. Alliance aircraft fired at targets in Allied airspace for the first time. Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, Italian AWACS aircraft responded together. At least 3 drones were shot down. Prime Minister Tusk told Parliament it was the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II. The concrete outcome of that Article 4 activation: additional Patriot batteries deployed to Poland. Airspace restrictions imposed along the eastern border. Operation Eastern Sentry established, NATO's current architecture for managing airspace violations related to the war. Romania's case is different from Poland's in one respect that matters. In Poland, 19 drones entered in a single night. No civilian casualties, 1 house damaged. In Romania, 28 incursions over 4 years, culminating in an explosive drone striking an apartment building and injuring 2 civilians, including a 14-year-old child. On diplomatic grounds, Romania's position for invoking Article 4 is stronger. It has not yet formally done so. But the card is on the table, and everyone in Brussels understands what it means that it's been placed there publicly. This is where the story stops being about one drone and starts being about what Romania has become. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Romania was, in honest terms, one of the weaker links on NATO's eastern flank. A 650-kilometer border with Ukraine, a Black Sea coastline, strategic ports within Russian strike range, and an air force still conducting patrols with Cold War-era MiG-21 fighter jets, 2020's threats being addressed with 1960s technology. What happened over the following 4 years is one of the least covered military transformations in Europe's recent history. The MiG-21s were retired and replaced by F-16 Fighting Falcons, acquired from Portugal, then Norway, then the Netherlands. By 2026, Romania operates 49 F-16s. With 18 additional aircraft arriving from the Netherlands, that fleet reaches 66 to 67 modern multi-role fighters by year-end. Those are the same F-16s that were scrambled over Galati on May 29th, the same class that shot down a Ukrainian drone over Estonia on May 19th, operating from Lithuania as part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. Romania's air defense has been rebuilt into a layered architecture. At the top layer, 4 Patriot PAC-3 Plus batteries, with 4 more contracted for delivery by 2027. In the medium and low altitude band, 231 Mistral surface-to-air launchers with 934 missiles, acquired from France, alongside South Korea's Chiron systems. And the layer that matters most for the specific threat that struck Galati: drone interception at low altitude. The Duran 2 that hit the Galati apartment building was flying a few hundred meters above the ground, below the effective engagement envelope of most conventional air defense. Romania has been building the specific answer to that problem: the MIROPS drone interceptor systems, developed by Project Eagle, the defense technology company founded in part by former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, were tested in Romania during NATO's LCIX Crucible Eastern Phoenix exercise in April 2026. More than 400 troops and defense industry manufacturers attended. The systems were evaluated against maritime drone threats. Romania's defense minister confirmed they would be operational within days of the Galati incident. 1 month earlier, and the drone over Galati would have met a different architecture. Romania's ground forces are undergoing the same transformation. Soviet-era tanks are being replaced by M1A2 SEPV-3 Abrams. HIMARS rocket systems provide strike capability with a 300-kilometer range into the Black Sea. 18 Bayraktar TB2 strike drones have been delivered. A joint drone production agreement was signed with Ukraine. A separate drone production and testing mechanism was established with the United States and United Kingdom. Romania is no longer only a country being protected from drones. It is becoming a country that manufactures them. The financial architecture behind all of this was finalized 9 days before the Galati incident. On May 12th, Romania signed the Safe Loan Agreement with the European Commission. 16.68 billion euros in EU-backed defense financing, the second largest allocation among all EU member states, after Poland, which received 43.7 billion euros. The program covers 21 separate Ministry of Defense procurement projects scheduled between 2026 and 2030. Mechanized warfare modernization, layered air defense, Black Sea naval reinforcement, helicopter fleet renewal, drone production capacity, and dual-use transport infrastructure toward Moldova and Ukraine. 9 days after that agreement was signed, a Russian drone fell on a Romanian apartment building. The European Commission's defense commissioner said the timing made the purpose of SAFE understood by everyone overnight. That is not an exaggeration. Now let me give you the full picture of what that drone flew over. The Danube River corridor that separates Romania from Ukraine has become one of the most strategically dense stretches of real estate in Europe. At Deveselu, in southern Romania, NATO's Aegis Ashore ballistic missile defense system uses SM-3 interceptors to engage medium-range ballistic missiles in flight. Russia has demanded its removal since 2016. It remains operational. At Mihail Kogalniceanu, near Constanta, the expansion of what will become NATO's largest base in Europe is underway. 2,800 hectares, designed for up to 10,000 troops. In March 2026, Romania approved a U.S. request to use the base for operations connected to the Middle East conflict, deploying up to 500 American service members. Any strike on that base is a strike on American personnel. That is not a NATO consensus question. That is a bilateral commitment that functions automatically. In January 2026, NATO opened its second major arms supply and coordination hub in Romania, running parallel with the Rzeszów hub in Poland, creating a southern route for military aid reaching Ukraine's Donbass and southern fronts. In 2025, 220,000 tons of military aid were delivered to Ukraine through NATO logistics structures: 9,000 trucks, 1,800 rail cars, 500 strategic airlift flights. The Constanta port and the Danube corridor were integral to that architecture. That is what the Duran 2 flew over at 1:54 in the morning. I want to be precise about what this means, and what it doesn't. Romania's Brigadier General Maxim said it directly. We are not under attack. We are facing the effects of a conflict taking place right next to our border. That assessment is probably correct. A single navigation-failed drone out of a 43-drone swarm is technically consistent with GPS drift, electronic warfare interference, or simple targeting error. The Kremlin has a defensible technical argument that the deviation was unintended. But that argument grows less credible with every incursion that gets added to the count. 28 violations over 4 years is not a navigation system struggling with GPS jamming. 28 violations is a pattern. And the question NATO has been asking, quietly, institutionally, is whether the absence of consequences has made that pattern easier to sustain. Romania's response last week was the beginning of an answer to that question, not Article 5. That threshold is different. It has been invoked once in NATO history after September 11th, and a navigation-failed drone does not constitute the armed attack that definition requires. Not even Article 4 yet, formally, but a consulate closed, an intelligence platform dismantled, a diplomat expelled, an ambassador summoned, a €16.68 billion rearmament program accelerating, a drone intercept law enacted 10 days before the incident, a new layer of low-altitude interceptors going operational within days, and an entire alliance on record saying, the next step up this ladder carries real consequences. The person who may have put it most clearly was an American living in Galati named Stephen Evelyn. This has happened 28 times. I don't believe the Russians are doing this by accident or they're highly incompetent at waging war. That is not analysis. That is lived experience. But it captures something that is harder to say in the language of strategic assessments and diplomatic notes. At some point, the argument that each violation is isolated and unintended requires the listener to ignore the aggregate, and Romania stopped ignoring the aggregate, somewhere between the 27th violation and the 28th. The Kremlin's calculation throughout this war has been consistent. Probe the edges, test the responses, accept the condemnations, and continue operating under the assumption that NATO's reluctance to escalate is permanent and unconditional. What changed on May 29th is that Romania demonstrated, with precision, with speed, with institutional weight, and with the backing of an entire alliance, that the assumption has an expiration date. The drone that fell on Galati cost Russia its consulate, its Black Sea intelligence platform, a piece of its diplomatic legitimacy with 32 nations, and whatever remained of the argument that these incursions are acceptable side effects of a distant war. Russia spent approximately $50,000 on that drone. What it lost in return cannot be priced the same way. And the next drone will not reach an apartment building, because the architecture being built to stop it is specifically, deliberately, and urgently designed so that it doesn't.